Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Now that Donald Trump is headed back to the White House, what will that mean for Canada? We have an analysis. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre blasted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, saying he needs to do more to prevent the United States from implementing tariffs, which will hurt the Canadian economy. And we hear from the vice chair of the Alberta beef producers, who says there's a bill being pushed by Ottawa which would have a devastating impact on our cattle industry.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in the end, it wasn't even close. Donald Trump has reclaimed the White House after winning the presidential election on Tuesday night by a landslide. Trump secured the minimum 270 electoral votes needed to win. Right now, he currently sits at 292 with projections of over 300. Trump also won the popular vote by around 5 million votes, more than Kamala Harris. We have more now from Meg Kennard of the Associated Press.
This is a moment of history in the U.S., as Trump is only the second president ever to be elected to return to the White House after losing it. He is also the first president to be elected after conviction on dozens of felony counts in a New York court case.
So I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
Trump campaigned on a variety of issues, but top among them, his desire to reform the U.S. immigration system and also better Americans' economic situation, something he said they had suffered under a Democratic White House. We also know from the results of AP VoteCast that those are two of the issues that American voters said were top of mind as they cast their ballots in the presidential contest.
Kamala Harris, meanwhile, delivered her concession speech on Wednesday night, saying the result was quite disappointing.
The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright.
Alberta Premier Daniel Smith congratulated Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance on winning the election. Smith says Alberta is the largest supplier of crude oil and natural gas to the United States, making it a critical part of North American energy security. So what does Trump winning mean for Canada's relationship with our closest ally, the U.S.? How will this really impact trade between our two nations? Canadian press reporter Kelly Geraldine Malone gives us her thoughts.
It was a long night, and here in Washington, D.C., it was obviously filled with anxiety. People watched closely as really the ballots coming in quickly showed that it was not going to be the night that the Democrats wanted. So leading up to the election, experts were saying that both candidates had pluses and minuses for the bilateral relationship with Canada. Officials have been pounding the pavement for months, ensuring that they were prepared in case there was a Trump presidency, and been making contacts with key members of the Republican team, including who they believe to be on the Republican transition team. Trump has proposed a 10% across the board tariff. There is no indication that Canada would get exemptions for. His last administration also saw the Republican leader get rid of the North America Free Trade Agreement. And a key test for Ottawa in the first Trump administration was the negotiation of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. That agreement is up for review in 2026. And Trump has indicated that there's some things he's going to want to be reviewing, which means that it won't likely be just a part for the course administrative look over.
U.S. political correspondent Lisa Daftari joins us now from Los Angeles to talk more about Trump's resounding victory on Tuesday night. Lisa, in the end, it really wasn't that close. Were you surprised?
Surprised that it went so smoothly and it was such a quick slam dunk, yes. Surprised that he won, no. This is a referendum on the Democratic Party if they choose to see it that way. If they choose to wake up this morning and instead of being emotional and upset get on board with this message of unity that we have to heal as a nation, because we absolutely do. Nobody wins when we're so divided. And B, to really look at the party and say, why is it that the average American, the common sense American, said, we don't want a party of DEI and a party that is so focused on this divide and the social justice issues over the things that matter to Americans every single day, like the economy, like our border, like security, like all the things that make America what it is.
And apparently it was the Amish in Pennsylvania who helped push Trump over the top in that swing state?
The election was saved by the Amish. A lot of groups coming out to support Donald Trump in historic numbers. African Americans, more than usual, supported a Republican nominee. There were a lot of groups like the Amish who, I don't know if you saw the video that went viral of horse and buggies going out to vote for Trump. I don't know if that was a verified video or not, but it was interesting to see the emphasis that was put on all kinds of groups that felt that they were represented by Donald Trump, but how so important that this election came down to Pennsylvania at the top of the night. And I said, I hope that the state that pushes Donald Trump over, should he be the final winner, is Pennsylvania, because it is very, very poetically just that he wins through Pennsylvania. It is where there was the attempted assassination.
Now, Lisa, can you explain the real difference between the electoral vote versus the popular vote?
So the electoral system was set up so that we have a fair way of representing the different states with their population. So states like Texas and California having a higher number of electoral votes, and places like Alaska having a lower one, or rural states having lower numbers, meaning that their states' voting should not weigh in as much as states that are highly populated. The popular vote just looks at numbers across the board. So in terms of raw numbers across the board, Trump was elected, meaning he got more votes. And in terms of the Electoral College, of course, you have to get 270, which is a majority of the 538 total electoral votes across the country. So every 4 years, it comes into question, does the electoral vote really, is it still relevant in a way that it represents the country? And it's always explained that, yes, this is the best way to represent all the different states and how they should factor into the sum.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was U.S. political correspondent and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, joining us from Los Angeles. Well, ever since Trump's resounding victory on Tuesday night, Google has been lit up with Canada work visa searches. According to the folks with journalresearch.org, Canada work visa searches skyrocketed by 566%. Also, searches of "if Trump wins, can I move to Canada?" peaked for the first time in 3 months. The study also says U.S. Google searches for "move to Canada" were projected to hit their highest mark since the beginning of August, increasing by 354%. Many of us are also interested to see which celebrities may be leaving the United States now that Trump has been elected. Many, including Robert De Niro, Tom Hanks, Whoopi Goldberg, George Clooney, and even Oprah, have said they would bail on the United States if Trump won again. Actually, might be kind of cool having George Clooney or maybe Oprah as your next-door neighbor. Speaking of a little cool, it was cool again today here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Roger is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, fortunately, it appears as though things may be warming up later this week.
Warming up so nicely, Hal. And I have to say, it's been just a lovely autumn so far. We've been getting absolutely spoiled with these temperatures. In fact, today, being that high of 8 degrees, was our last single-digit day for the next several days. After this, it's going to be double digits from here on out for the next 4 or 5 days at least. Even our overnight lows are staying above the freezing mark, which is just wonderful. Now, into tomorrow, Thursday, we're expecting that high of 12 degrees, sunshine. I expect it to be a little bit more windy than it was today as well. So we'll be seeing 20 kilometer per hour wind from the west, increasing to 40 and then gusting to 60 kilometers per hour by the afternoon there. And then after that, we're going to be expecting some teen temperatures headed our way. And I'll be back later on the show to tell you all about that.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says now that Trump will be headed back to the White House, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau needs to do more to prevent American tariffs from hurting Canadians. He cites an example of how former Prime Minister Stephen Harper supported Canadian workers by only taking 80 days to get a softwood lumber deal with the United States and putting an end to the tariffs.
And then this Liberal Prime Minister capitulated, allowed Trump to reimpose the tariffs and Biden to double them. Harper got us an exemption to Buy America. This Prime Minister then capitulated, allowed Trump and Biden to reimpose them, hurting our construction workers and our providers of steel. Why can't we have a carbon tax election so that we can have a Prime Minister that no longer capitulates to the Americans, but instead will stand up for Canada?
Bill C-293, which is going through its second reading in the Senate, looks to address pandemic prevention and preparedness. Now, the legislation, however, contains terms such as phase out and alternative proteins that have agriculture producers wondering what Ottawa is actually preparing for. Doug Roxburgh, Vice Chair of Alberta Beef Producers, explains.
I mean, that's really the question that we have is the same as you guys. What is phase out mean? Why would we need to replace, meat proteins with alternatives? Certainly don't have clear understanding of that, and what would initiate some of these protocols that they're talking about putting in place. We have the bill there, but it has no clarity in terms of us understanding, what any of those words mean and how they would implement, further action.
Hear more of the concerns from Doug Roxburgh of Alberta Beef Producers in an interview with Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our program. A big rally in support of some of the Alberta government's recently announced legislation will be taking place this Saturday afternoon at the Legislature in Edmonton. Now, one of the organizers of the event is Jojo Ruba with parentsandkidstogether.ca. He says it's pretty important for politicians to know how many parents support the legislation, which he says protects our children.
Well, I have political friends who say that we only speak to them when we're sad or angry, and they want us to come and share when they're doing something right, and they're actually doing something right when it comes to legislation protecting children from transitioning and protecting the right of biological girls to compete with other biological girls in sports. And these three pieces of legislation that the Premier and the government introduced just a few days ago is something that is the first of its kind in Canada. And Albertans need to stand up and say, we need this legislation, because people who are opposed to this legislation are using all kinds of vitriolic comments, calling it hateful, and saying that we want to murder transgender kids. This is how outrageous this is, to simply say, no, parents have a right to know if any kind of medical or chemical or even social changes, like using pronouns, happen with their kids at school. And I think the vast majority, in fact, the stats show this, the vast majority of Albertans, and the vast majority of people understand the rights of children is, in fact, to be protected by their parents. It's actually kids' rights to be protected by their parents. And they can't have that right exist if parents don't know what's going on. So on Saturday, we're celebrating this legislation. We're asking all Albertans to come and join us at 1 o'clock at the legislature, because the public, the media, and our elected officials need to know this legislation is common sense and must be passed.
That was Jojo Ruba joining us from parentsandkidstogether.ca. Lethbridge police have charged a fellow officer with assault during an on-duty incident. Constable Chris Stock, a 23-year member of the service, was involved in a physical altercation with an inmate in the LPS short-term holding facility back in May of last year. Now, upon review of a use of force report, an investigation by the Professional Standards Unit was forwarded to the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service and recommended a charge of assault on Constable Stock. He is currently serving administrative duties and will appear in court on December the 10th. There's a unique museum in the town of Nanton, Alberta, which honors our Canadian Air Force members and features some pretty incredible aircraft. It is called the Bomber Command Museum of Canada. Now, in part 2 of our series at the museum, BCN's Heidi Echevarria examines all that the museum has to offer, including how many women were part of the bomber's history.
So here at Bomber Command Museum of Canada, which is a national memorial, we have the 10,800 names of the Canadians killed in bombers in World War II. Not only do we have their names, we have each individual man's story here. So when families come to us, and I had an uncle in World War II in bombers, we can tell them the whole story of their uncle.
Without those places or people who tell us or remind us of what humanity has been through, the history we know today would be forgotten. That is why places like the Bomber Command Museum of Canada in Nanton, Alberta, can be considered a human and historical bastion with which we reinforce a slogan like, "Lest we forget."
Canadians and British fly their bombers at night, so paint them black. Daytime is American job, nighttime is British and Canadian job. He's the guy that sits in the nose, and the pilot is helping him get to the target, and he's saying left, left, steady, steady, right. You know, they want to get right dead on, and when they're right over the target, bomb's gone.
Not much is said about female participation during the Second World War. Carol Kavsgar says that although women's liberation had not yet arrived, women were also key to the fight for freedom.
17,000 women were in the Royal Canadian Air Force in World War II. They're called Women's Division Royal Canadian Air Force. And they did all the jobs at the Air Force, mechanics, vehicle drivers, office work, weathermen. They were the weather people. They would do the jobs that the men would normally do. So what could the men do? They could go fight. This is before Women's Lib. Some of them went to England, but the majority were in Canada running the Air Force.
This memorial museum has one of only 4 running Lancaster in the world. The museum is also working on the reconstruction of the Halifax and also has other planes and vehicles used before and during the World War II. The Bomber Command Museum of Canada also has many true stories to tell about the Second World War and its protagonists. The Bomber Command Museum of Canada is open to the public on Saturdays and Sundays. For Bridge City News, I'm Heidi Echavarria.
Enrolling teenagers into sports teams and extracurricular activities can oftentimes be difficult and quite costly. There's an alternative, however, for our nation's youth, and it's been around for over 100 years. BCN's Naveen Day has more now on this well-kept secret.
Jets come in, attention!
Not every youth desires to learn personal discipline or how to be a team player or wants to develop their leadership skills. But yet that is exactly what thousands of Canada's youth crave, and many of them can be found in one of our country's many cadet units. I'm here at the Royal Canadian Sea Cadet Corps Chinook, which parades on Monday evenings. And according to Commanding Officer Lieutenant Robert Neufeld, the cadet program is Canada's best kept youth secret. And Sea Cadets in a landlocked province actually provides more and better opportunities than those who live close to the coast.
I like to explain to cadets that because there isn't a lot of opportunities here and we're kind of landlocked, that when they go to summer training for sail or anything related to seamanship, they have to go far away. We send them out to Vancouver Island for the summer or that type of thing. So they get experiences that they wouldn't get in the other elements.
One of the most popular summer training establishments for Sea Cadets is HMCS Quadra in Comox, BC. Chinook's Divisional Petty Officer Sable Meadows says her experiences in Quadra have made some unforgettable memories.
I was taking a sailing course there. I was able to get my Sail 1 and my Sail 2, and I was able to sail with some orca whales, leopard seals every day, and it was overall amazing.
And cadets are given ample opportunities to meet some serious brass in the Canadian Armed Forces.
When I was at Quadra, since I was working security, we had to maintain the base, and on the very last day of work, we had our final parade, and the Commodore of the Canadian Pacific Fleet came by. I got to meet him. It's a really cool experience because he is the guy who is in charge of every ship on the Pacific.
Cadets are known for taking meticulous care for their uniforms and appearance. Their hair needs to be short or gelled back and pinned, uniforms pressed, boots polished, and white tops scrubbed with toothpaste. But for senior cadets, they find it to be a relaxing and rewarding responsibility.
I must say that I am more organized now that I've been dealing with the uniform and I've been trying to maintain it. and it's just a daily habit now, ironing and polishing.
As you go through the phases, you'll gain more responsibility. Like for myself, since I'm acting coxswain, if one cadet uniform isn't in check, I'll sometimes get in trouble for it because I didn't go to that cadet to tell them this is what you need to do to your uniform.
Neufeld adds he has been told by alumni on numerous occasions how the cadet program has helped them in pursuing their careers.
I've had many cadets come to me and say, you know what, I wasn't sure I was going to get the job until I mentioned I was a former cadet, and the employer changed immediately and said, oh, well, if you're a cadet, you know how to do this and this and this already, so we don't have to train you as much.
And by the sounds of it, some Southern Alberta cadets have gone on to do incredible things, including working their way up to the top of Canada's Navy.
A former cadet from Southern Alberta went on to become the commander of the Navy. Vice Admiral Lloyd, before he retired, he was the commander of the Navy, and he was from Taber.
The Sea Cadet program is funded by the Department of National Defence and the Navy League of Canada. This funding means there are no registration fees, no costs for uniforms, and no charge for summer camp. Each year, tens of thousands of youth have been part of the program, including this young guy when he was a teen. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Well, it was mainly overcast and fairly cool in Lethbridge on Wednesday. It does appear, however, that the mercury will be climbing back into the teens. Full weather details are coming up. I've been kind of debating about when would be a good time to put on my winter tires. Let's ask our local weather analyst, Jeanette Rocher. Jeanette, any snow in the forecast for us here in southwestern Alberta? And if not, perhaps maybe I can wait just a little bit longer before I do that tire swap?
Well, I'm with you on putting that off, Hal. Maybe not the wisest, but you know, when you look at these temperatures, you know, why not? We're heading back into the mid-teens there pretty soon. Today was our last single-digit day for a while. We're seeing a high of 12 on Thursday, up to 16 degrees on Friday and 15 on Saturday. I mean, this is like 10 degrees above average high for this time of year. That's what we're talking about. Back to 7 degrees on Sunday, back to double digits next Monday with a high of 10 degrees, and then back to more seasonal with that 3 degrees on Tuesday, ending out that 7-day forecast. So average high for this time of year is 6 degrees, average low -6. Record high on this day was 23 degrees. That happened way back in 1949, and in 1936 was the record low, which was -29. 8:30, right on the nose. That's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 5:59 p.m. So now we are seeing 9 hours and 29 minutes of daylight, actually 6 minutes shorter today than yesterday, if you can believe that. It's happening fast. Okay, 11 degrees on in the island tomorrow. Victoria seeing a mix of sun and cloud, mainly cloudy skies in Vancouver, high of 12 degrees there. 13 in Edmonton tomorrow, lovely 14 in Calgary with sunshine. So we're seeing those mid-teen temperatures all across Alberta tomorrow. As we get to sunny, the rest of the sunny prairies, we're seeing lots of sunshine, clear skies in all 3 of these cities. 13 Saskatoon, 11 in Regina, and a high of 9 degrees in Winnipeg. Let's look now to the central portion of the country and see what our friends in Toronto are dealing with tomorrow. Not a bad day at all. 14 for a high, mainly sunny skies, mix of sun and cloud in Ottawa. 11 for the high, and 10 degrees in Montreal, looking at a 40% chance of showers there. As we look to the Atlantic portion of the country here, the Maritimes, Fredericton 11 for the high, 12 in Halifax, sitting at the 30% chance of showers, 8 for the high in Charlottetown, and 5 in St. John's, also seeing a 40% chance of showers there with 30 to 50K winds there in St. John's. So there you have it. That's your forecast.
Some Canadian business owners waking up to the news that Donald Trump is returning to the White House have expressed worry over the former president's promise to introduce a 10% tariff. Now, Canadian Chamber of Commerce report suggests those tariffs would shrink the Canadian economy, resulting in around $30 billion per year in economic costs. American economists have warned Trump's plan could cause inflation and possibly a recession, which would then have ripple effects here in Canada. The Toronto Region Board of Trade says that since the Canada-US-Mexico agreement came into effect in 2020, trade between Canada and the United States has surged by 46%. That deal is up for review in 2026. The union representing Canada Postal Workers says it has presented new offers to the National Postal Service. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says the offers ask for wage increases of 22% over 4 years for urban, rural, and suburban workers. Workers have voted in favor of a strike if a deal cannot be reached. Now, here's a look at today's markets, which were up considerably with the Trump and J.D. Vance victory.
The TSX was up 249 basis points of the day to 24,637. The Dow was also up 1,508 basis points to 43,729. The S&P 500 was up 146 points to 5,929, and the Nasdaq was also up 544 points to 18,983. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 10 cents to 71.89 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 4 cents to $2.71 US. Gold was down 78.30 to $2,662 US an ounce. And silver was down $1.54 to $31.16 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.38 per bushel, barley is at $6.29, canola is at $14.72, and corn is at $7.52 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was up 62 cents to $185.40. Feeder cattle November contract was up $1.55 to $247.70, and lean hogs December contract was up $1 to $81.12. And the Canadian dollar was down over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 71.74 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Donald Trump is returning to the White House. The former U.S. president secured the minimum 270 electoral votes to win the U.S. presidency. Political experts say Trump won campaigning on the economy, a promise to fight illegal immigration, and running a more common-sense government. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took to X and congratulated Trump on his victory, saying, quote, "I know President Trump and I will work together to create more opportunity, prosperity, and security for both of our nations." You know, there are many in our cattle industry who are quite concerned over a new federal bill they say will devastate our beef industry. Doug Roxburgh with Alberta Beef Producers shares the details with BCN's Jeanette Rocher momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews.
Recently, the federal government passed Private Members Bill C-293, which is an act respecting pandemic prevention and preparedness, which is intended to mitigate the risk of and prepare for a potential future pandemic. The bill is currently going through its second reading in the Senate, but it's getting all kinds of pushback from the Alberta government, as well as agricultural producers. So joining us to chat more about this and some of the concerns is Doug Roxburgh. He is the Vice Chair of Alberta Beef Producers. He joins me now. Thanks so much for joining us, Doug. It looks like you're in a vehicle there, probably out by a farm, right?
Yeah, I'm just out west by Edson, sitting in a stubble field, visiting with you guys. Great to be with you today.
Thank you so much. That sounds exactly like something somebody in the ag sector would do. So, Doug, I assume that you're not against preparations for any potential future pandemics, but I understand that you do have some concerns regarding the wording of this legislation. So this bill would give the federal government the power to shut down livestock operations as well as meat processing plants that they deem to be high risk. So what are your thoughts on this?
So, I mean, I think it's really important to understand that the Canadian cattle industry, is fully supportive of any pandemic preparedness and prevention going forward. We certainly support any measures along that. Unfortunately, Bill C-293 has some clauses that are put in there right now that have some incredibly vague wording, and those wording have potential negative impacts to not only the cattle sector but all of agriculture right now. And so we've certainly been working with the Alberta government to communicate our concerns around what Bill C-293 potentially can bring forward to our industry.
Okay, and if the government were at some point to shut down livestock producers, does the bill provide for some kind of an appeal process, or is it a final decision without appeal?
I think that's our biggest concern is there's no clarity written within the bill as to what exactly, phase out or shut down means and which sectors within agriculture are going to be affected by that. So without having much more clarity provided to us, we don't understand or know what those processes would look like. And so for us to have an appeal or something in place that we would work towards without further clarity, for our MPs and senators to understand and communicate to us as an industry, we really don't have a clear vision of what it is we would do going forward. So
yeah, and of course you mentioned there that one of your concerns is that the bill mentions the possibility of phasing out farming practices that the government considers high risk. So do we know what that means? I mean, you're saying it's very vague and you guys don't have answers, do you?
I mean, it's really the question that we have is the same as you guys. What is phase out mean? Why would we need to replace, meat proteins with alternatives? Certainly don't have clear understanding of that, and what would initiate some of these protocols that they're talking about putting in place. We have the bill there, but it has no clarity in terms of us understanding, what any of those words mean and how they would implement, further action. Yeah.
Right, and we're kind of left to believe that it could mean that beef, pork, or chicken producers would never be allowed to provide meat for Canadians. I mean, I believe the bill does say something about replacing meat with alternative proteins. What does that mean?
I mean, that's essentially it. We need to understand and have a balanced, clear vision of what this bill represents going forward and understand that, we're just not in favor of seeing, alternative-based proteins, become forced upon Canadians. There certainly is a huge appetite and uptake, in beef and pork and chicken consumption, and we certainly don't support that being pulled apart and going forward. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's say if the government were to actually mandate the consumption of vegetable proteins, how do you think the average Canadian citizen would feel about that?
We can't speak about, to what the thoughts are of an average consumer, but we certainly know that the average household, in 2022, spent about $400 on beef direct per household, and we saw consumption of beef at about 17.5 kgs, per person on retail weight. So, Canadians value beef, and especially Alberta beef. So, it's really important to understand that we're trying to create, a high level of food security. And, a lot of this transition can really jeopardize a lot of that going forward.
Yeah, you're right. I'm not sure that the average person would feel secure about our food supply necessarily. And of course, this would have a devastating effect on meat producers. But Doug, do you have a ballpark estimate of how much this would impact our overall economy with the spin-off businesses that the meat industry connects with?
So Alberta beef producer said, really feels that that's a hard number, to truly provide. But I mean, some statistics that we have, is that Alberta alone in the cattle sector contributed $4 billion to our provincial GDP, including $2.7 billion in labor income in 2021. The sector generates about 55,000 jobs, and the slaughter and meat processing sector contributes $54.9 billion to the GDP and over 44,000 full-time equivalent jobs. So the cattle industry is incredibly valuable to Albertans and potentially devastating to the industry if this was put forward.
And I do understand that the government needs to keep Canadians safe, but doesn't the ag sector already have robust health protections in place to protect against pandemics?
I mean, it's something that we continue to work on. I know myself personally, we've been traveling down to the U.S., working with our American counterparts on some of the strategic plans around things like foot and mouth. I know our pork industry has been working incredibly closely on, prevention of diseases like African swine fever. I mean, poultry industry has certainly been dealing with their industry as well and some of their issues. So, we've got great surveillance in place currently right now to help assist in identifying and tracking and monitoring when these issues might come up. Working on prevention's been huge. Right now all farmers within the province of Alberta and across Canada now work with under provisions put forward with our animal veterinarian care people that we work with, the professionals. And so we've been working extremely hard to, really be at the forefront of identifying animal diseases and how we can, really work to mitigate risks on the disease front here within the agriculture industry.
Does the ag sector feel alienated by the current federal government? What kind of feedback are you guys getting from your members?
I mean, as producers, we've got a very diverse industry and diverse people within the industry that have, many opinions on that. I'd say, the biggest thing for us is the language that's put in a lot of these bills, such as 293. The other one that's been put forward by the federal government has been Bill C-282, which is basically a protection on supply management going forward on further trade. So I know within our industry, we're certainly willing and wanting to work with government, but lately there's just been maybe a few bills that we've had to communicate with our producers and ultimately communicate back with MPs and senators to try to, create a clearer understanding of what concerns our industry has.
So if the bill passes, what options do groups like yours have to get this bill repealed? Will there be protests? I mean, should viewers be contacting their senators and MPs like you just said?
Yeah, I mean, so I know right now our counterparts through Alberta and national cattle feeders are out in Ottawa meeting with our MPs and senators. Myself, our chair, Brody Hogan of Alberta Beef Producers, both us have been out to Ottawa. We've had specific meetings with senators and MPs, really trying to create a clear understanding and line of sight and help educate our MPs and senators on what these bills are potentially doing. So right now we don't have a clear understanding of what we would look to do, simply for the fact that we don't really have a clear understanding of the vague language that's written in a lot of these bills to truly understand going forward.
Yeah, and of course you mentioned that other bill, that the other piece of legislation that's sort of concerning for beef producers and other in the ag sector, which is Bill C-82, like you mentioned, and that's the pro-supply.
Yes.
Yeah, C-282. I know there's so many numbers and letters happening here, but yeah, that's that pro-supply management bill. So would that bill specifically, I believe it promotes the dairy, poultry, and egg sectors, right? But it has a negative impact on the majority of ag producers who rely heavily on exports and trade with other nations, right?
So like right now, about 90% of our farmers in Canada rely on the export market that, we've developed within Canada and with our trading partners like Mexico and the United States, just as two examples. Right now, that bill essentially kind of locks in supply management. And so, one of our colleagues kind of put forward that if you were in a poker match, and you had a card that, could help win your hand, you certainly wouldn't run out and announce what that card was. And essentially by playing, by working on C-282 and supply management and taking that off the table with any communications, our trading partners now know what our hand is. And so we're really concerned because it's very protectionist against the supply managed industries, but doesn't give our trading people that we send off into the world to communicate and work on trade negotiations with our counterparts. It doesn't give them the freedom to have that discussion. It kind of limits what they can talk about and plays their hand ahead of time. So it's incredibly concerning going forward.
But is that bill not basically a form of protectionism in a sense?
100% it is, yes, yeah, and it just unfortunately it speaks to the supply managed sector of our agriculture industry and really has a negative effect. Now, unfortunately, I mean, we simply talk about the negative effect around agriculture, but there's lots of other sectors. I mean, BC with the lumber industry, Quebec with their airplane. Um, um, Industry that they have there and trading partners. I mean, there's a lot of other sectors that don't get lumped in and understanding how this can have a negative effect much beyond what is involved in agriculture.
So with that pro-supply management bill, it sounds almost like it would get some votes more from Quebec, but not so much in Western Canada.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to know what what that would do, but I mean fundamentally the bill is flawed in the way that it's presented. Again, like we spoke, I mean the bill potentially protects supply management, which many in Quebec might see to be favorable. We've got a huge supply management sector in Western Canada as well. I mean, where I call home, in Lacombe County, we're heavily supply managed, so it's certainly understanding why it's being put forward. A lot of MPs that represent people within each county have areas that supply management is a big aspect of what they represent. But it's important to understand the bigger picture and how this can have negative impacts going forward.
Yeah, is supply management a big issue? Like, has it been a problem?
No, I mean, I don't think it's been a problem. I just believe supply management in the past has had issue with their sector being put up for trade negotiations. A few years ago, a small piece of supply management was offered up and was given. Concessions were put in place with some of our trading partners, had a negative effect. Now, those industries were also subsidized through the government through a one-time payment to help offset what they lost essentially through those trade negotiations. So I certainly respect the ideas and what supply management is looking for protection, but unfortunately, there's a bigger picture that we have to keep an eye on for sure.
So in the meantime, what are you encouraging your supporters to do? What are the options?
So, I mean, like I said, right now, a lot of our industry groups, Alberta Beef, Alberta Pork, Alberta Cattle Feeders, National Cattle Feeders have been communicating with our MPs and senators. I certainly encourage people that are concerned around these bills to write and call their local MPs and senators. Communication with them, I think, is incredibly key. I know from Alberta Beef producer standpoint, we've been working hard to communicate back to the producers that we represent what's being done, both provincially and also through our Canadian Cattle Association, our national organization. So a lot of that information is being shared through albertadaily.com and then through some of our monthly minute newsletters that get sent out. So yeah, as producers, stay informed from what Alberta Beef Producers is working on, but certainly don't hesitate to reach out to your MPs and senators as well.
All right, some good information and advice there. Thanks so much, Doug, for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Doug Roxburgh is the vice chair of the Alberta Beef Producers. Well, there are many people in our society who need constant care, whether it's an elderly person or a handicapped individual. Those who provide the necessary care for these people put an incredible amount of love and sacrifice in. So joining us from Michigan to discuss this more is Jessica Ronnie. She is a mother of 8, a caregiver advocate, and the director of the Lucas Project, and also the author of Caregiving with Grit and Grace. Just to add more to her list there. Great to have you with us today, Jessica. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It sounds like you have your hands full.
I do.
Okay.
I'm trying to sort that out.
Yeah. So first off, maybe give us a little snapshot of what your book is all about and the style of your book as well.
Yeah, my book is Caregiving with Grit and Grace. It's 100 days of hope and encouragement. They are short daily readings for caregivers and caregivers in all capacities, all walks of life. It's not just necessarily for caregivers of disabled children. I also lost my first husband, so I'm very familiar with being a caregiver to a spouse with a terminal illness as well. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to write this book and to share it with all the caregivers in the world.
Wow. And I was going to say, like, much of the content of your book does come from your own life experiences as a caregiver. Can you maybe share a little bit of your personal story?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I've been a caregiver to my 20-year-old son, Lucas, who is profoundly disabled and he will require care for the rest of his life. I was a caregiver for 3 years to my late husband, Jason, as he battled brain cancer. And recently kind of even came to the realization that I've been in a caregiver role since I was about 2 years old. I am the oldest of 12 children. When I was two, my mom had twins, and I have all these pictures of me like holding holding one of the babies, caring for the baby. So for some reason, God in his wisdom decided to make me sort of a forever caregiver. And it's a role that I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm entirely comfortable with, but I've tried to stay obedient and just be as faithful as I can to the calling.
Yeah, well, Jessica, I have to say that you seem so positive. And I mean, it's not a lot in life that a lot of people would necessarily want to volunteer for, but it sounds like he gave it to the right person. The way that you're able to kind of share your wisdom with others, there must be times when the load can feel overwhelming. How do you respond in those times?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even when my husband Jason was going through cancer, anger was my fuel. And, we can tap into different fuels as caregivers, and it was an unhealthy fuel, but anger's adrenaline too, and it kind of gets you through those moments. I was a mom with 4 young children, 6 and under, and a dying husband. So I had to tap into something. And as I've aged and matured, I've figured out that there are healthier fuels to tap into. But definitely my faith, and that's included wrestling with God on occasions and saying, I don't understand why you would give me all these brain issues. My late husband had brain cancer, and 6 weeks later, my son had brain surgery. So it was just like one thing after another there for a while. And just at the end of the day, saying, you are Lord and I am not. I don't understand it, but you are sovereign. And so I have to just trust your plan for my life.
Oh, absolutely. I can imagine people in that situation. Burnout must be really rampant, and respite care isn't always available. So, what's your advice for caregivers? It's important to take breaks at time, isn't it? Just to make sure you don't burn out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important. And I know a lot of us sort of have this martyr syndrome where we feel like we're the only one who can care for our loved one. But I would just encourage caregivers to try to drop that martyr mentality. I'll often say you're no good to anybody if you're dead. So you have to take care of yourself so that you can adequately take care of your loved one. And then I would say to the world at large, caregivers, we're exhausted. We are depressed, we're stressed, we're isolated, we're exhausted. Reach out and offer something. You don't necessarily have to offer to, care for our disabled child, but use your gifts in some way, make a meal or do some yard work or offer to do laundry. Or I once had a woman come over to my house and cut all of my kids' hair right in the comfort of my home so that I wouldn't have to leave my husband, who wasn't doing so well at that point. But I would just really encourage everybody to reach out to the caregivers they know and just offer to step in and help in some way.
That's a really great example of what friends and neighbors can do and can offer to help these caregivers that are just undergoing so much, because it's so much time that they're giving, energy, blood, sweat, tears, everything, you name it. It's just so hard to even imagine what these caregivers are going through. And now, Jessica, in your book, you mentioned that it's easy to complain. So how do you stay away from complaining? Because that can really get you down too and put you in a really negative mindset.
Yeah. How do you stay away from complaining? I think I often give myself permission to say it, if not even to people. I think that's what the admonishment is, not to necessarily complain to everybody, on social media, because these are sacred moments. These are holy moments as you care for this individual. But to even allow yourself permission to say it, to voice it to maybe a trusted friend or your husband or the Lord, to get it out of your system. Because I do think that those thoughts can fester too and can actually manifest in, negativity and illness or depression or whatever down the road. So I think allowing yourself permission to state it, face it, and then it is what it is. Get yourself up and continue on with your day. But to release it out of your body in some way, I think is really healthy.
Yeah. And speaking of allowing yourself permission, I would imagine that a lot of caregivers maybe feel the guilt complex about taking time for themselves away from that person. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, how important that is? And
Yeah, I
that
think
you're
it
not
goes
being selfish, basically.
right. Right. I think it goes back to what I said earlier. You're no good to anybody if you die because you didn't take care of yourself. So take those moments. Even in all of my caregiving over 47 years, I try to walk every single day. It's just the way I kind of shake the stress out of my body. It's, my meditation, my prayer time. It's me time. It's me with nature and just getting out into the elements. And it's almost metaphorical of life and of this caregiving journey. We just walk through it step by step. And that's all we can do. We just have to stay present and focused. But yeah, to find whatever that is for you, if it's, yoga or taking a dance class or going on a date with your spouse or walking, try to prioritize that at least somewhat consistently. So that you can get those breaks that you really do deserve and need.
Yeah, good advice. You mentioned your son, Lucas. So how has living with Lucas impacted the lives of your other children? Because you have other children as well that you care for.
Yeah, we have a few. We have 7 other children, and
A few.
a few. Lucas is, well, we have 8 total.
Wow.
People ask that often, and they probably had to grow up a lot faster. And we see such a level of independence and compassion and care that they have towards other people with disabilities or towards the elderly. 7 of my kids lost a parent to brain cancer as well. So they, we talk about this a lot, and it's just part of their story. It's part of their journey, and it's up to them whether they're going to do something positive with this part of their story or something not so positive. And so far, we've just seen a lot of positivity and compassion and care come out of all of them. And being, Luke's sibling. And that's not to say that they all are like completely enamored with him and would drop everything that they're doing to stay home and help with him. We do have a couple of kids who are wired that way, but we have a couple who are definitely not wired that way. But they still love their brother, and they'll help out wherever they're able to. And I think it's just made them better people because he's been their brother.
Yeah, exactly. He's been a blessing. So in what ways has Lucas been a blessing to other people who encounter him? Obviously, the siblings all live with him. That's a whole different story. But, there's other people in your lives.
Yeah, I think everybody would just say his life has just brought so much hope and encouragement. I look at my son, who is the most humble human being on the face of the earth. He doesn't care if anybody ever knows his name or knows anything about him. And I just look at all of the amazing things that his story has brought forth, with this book, Caregiving with Grit and Grace, 2 documentary projects, a nonprofit called the Lucas Project that, helps and supports other special needs families. So Lucas is exactly as the Lord intended Lucas to be, and his life has just brought so many positive changes to the world. And I just think it's such a blessing to be his mom.
So Jessica, you mentioned the Lucas Project. So maybe explain what that is a little bit and what you do.
Yeah, the Lucas Project started when we lived in rural Tennessee. Lucas was going through puberty. He was becoming very aggressive. He's nonverbal. His behaviors were intensifying. And we could not find any respite or support or resources or anything for our family. My husband ended up in ER twice with panic attacks that resembled heart attacks. And we were just desperate for help, for a break. And I remembered my promise to him as a baby that I would one day start a nonprofit in his honor, always thinking that the nonprofit would help children. And when I realized how desperate we were for a break, I realized that the nonprofit had to help the caregivers. So I just Googled how to start a nonprofit, printed off the paperwork, filled it out, sent it out, and a couple months later, apparently I was founder of a nonprofit. It's not that difficult. And so we started offering monthly respite days to special needs families in rural Tennessee. We partnered with a local school who allowed us to use their space. And we did that very successfully until COVID. And then we had to kind of shift and reorient our priorities and what that was going to look like. But currently, we are now back in Michigan, and we are starting respite days for special needs families again in January. We offer recognition through our film projects. We send out care packages nationally to caregivers who are nominated. We also partner with a local children's hospital. We bring these care packages down to parents in ICU with their children. What else do we do? We have a podcast. So just anything that we can do to help these families in some way, we try to reach out and serve these families.
That's incredible. What's in the care package? I'm just curious.
It's a box full of luxury type items, like respite type items, journals and books and coffees and teas and spa items, just anything that would say, you know, we see you, here's a box of encouragement. And we do have an Amazon wish list on our website where people can send in items for those as well.
That's incredible. Now, in your book, you write about the need to keep an eye on the big picture. So what's the big picture to you, Jessica?
It's eternity, and it's being obedient to what God has called me to do. I'll often say, you know, we may not necessarily know why we have to go through trials and hardships this side of eternity, but I do believe it will all make sense someday when we get to heaven. And ultimately, our lives are a living sacrifice, and it's a surrender to what God wants us to do in order to bring glory to His name. So I try to be obedient. Sometimes I buck the system a while before I end up being obedient, but I do have that eternal perspective in mind.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's important for any caregiver to kind of have that faith just to get through what's facing you on a daily basis?
I do. I consider it holy work. Our caregiving is a holy offering. It's the most holy work we can do this side of eternity, and I think we've kind of lost track of that. You know, we enter the world needing care, and most likely we'll leave the world needing care, and we're fortunate if we don't require it in between. And somehow we've gotten away from this care model and valuing care and respecting care and those who give care. And I think in some ways we've gotten away from what it means to be human because we don't value care anymore.
Interesting. Jessica, any final encouragement for caregivers and their friends and families?
Yeah, I would say, you know, for caregivers, I think it's so easy to get caught up in the future. You know, is my loved one going to be healed or go into remission, or will they die? Or what does the future look like for my disabled adult child? And I would just really encourage caregivers to try to stay present, try to take the caregiving journey step by step, like that walking analogy, and just try not to get so caught up in the what ifs, because I think often getting caught up in those what ifs removes you from the present beauty of the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. Looks like we're out of time here, but Jessica, thanks so much for sharing your story with us today. We really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, thank you.
Jessica Ronnie is the author of Caregiving with Grit and Grace. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.